question is whether or not humans and chimpanzees can breed. The answer to that question is yes. When you look on Google, you are going to hear that because of our different chromosome number, that we cannot breed. And let's go over that discrepancy really quick here.
The Negroid and the Mongoloid clearly do share DNA with the Pan ancestors, which also share DNA with the bonobo, which is actually a separate species than the chimpanzee. Despite the amount of differences that they have are far less than between the so-called human races. So it's important to know that mosaicism, when it comes to breeding with species with different chromosome numbers, can result in an odd number of chromosomes, such as 47 chromosomes, which was reported in Oliver, the so-called Chimpanzee. He was actually world famous for being a Chimpanzee. I'll show you that clip later on. And it's also found in trisomy 21, or Down syndrome, which also has 47 chromosomes, which used to be considered the result of mixing, or Mongolism used to be the word for Down syndrome. And so in the root word of the word Mongolism, we have features of Down syndrome, such as Mongolian folds. And those features of Down syndrome are present in pretty much every Asian and 70% of Negroids. And it results in massive amounts of misdiagnosis. You can't use screening criteria on a population when they have almost all or all of the features of Down syndrome, or when they have Down syndrome, they don't have some of the features that we're using to screen it for Down syndrome. And because they normally have these features, very few of them undergo genetic testing for Down syndrome, which would actually confirm Down syndrome. So it's true that we do not have good rates of Down syndrome among Negroid or Mongoloid populations, and there is evidence to indicate that it came from interbreeding with these populations, which would not be a surprise since the root word indicates that it's genetic. And also it results from 47 chromosomes, which is intermediate between humans and chimpanzees. And mosaicism is a cause of genetic Down syndrome. And we know that mosaicism results from hybridization between two separate species. Let's look at this article from Nature. We can see that the African shares almost all of their DNA with Pan ancestors. Pan ancestors are Australopithecus afarensis, Homo naledi, these sorts of things. And we can see this pattern of hybridization or reticulate evolution that's basically interbreeding with these species in Africans. And some scientists argue that Africans are in fact Homo erectus or Australopithecus afarensis or some other archaic species. And it's also important to know that those archaic species are considered non-human. And you can see here that almost all of their DNA, so ILS means incomplete lineage sorting, and that's what they're comparing here. It's important to know that ILS is a indicator of interbreeding between separate species. And we can see that pattern clearly overlaps here, and that the Negroid DNA is almost half of the Negroid DNA is composed of bonobo DNA. And we can see over here that the European doesn't share any DNA with any of those other populations. That very clearly indicates that we don't even share a common ancestor, that we are completely unique and distinct species, which was the theory prior to this legislation that occurred since 1860 that legislated the Negroid and Mongoloid to be human. There's a very good article about how Negroids and Mongoloids were legislated to be human, that it was never actually based in science. And to this date, all of the evidence, including the evidence that pre-existed these theories, this out of Africa that was proposed in 1970. Now, these are post hoc explanations for the legislation that began in 1860. So we have this post hoc explanation of out of Africa first proposed in 1970, and then mitochondrial Eve, that was proposed in 1985. And we can see that the actual evidence only confirms the previous scientific findings, that the Negroids and Mongoloids have a completely different evolutionary origin than the Europeans. And let's look at my DNA. So here we see that I share absolutely no DNA with the Negroids and Mongoloids. Now that also, again, confirms that we don't share a common ancestor. The allegation is that Negroids, Mongoloids, and Europeans all share an ancestor. If that were true, the evidence must exist. It's like a paternity test. In order to be related, you have to share DNA. If you don't share DNA, that proves the theory is incorrect. And we can see here that Europeans share no DNA with the Negroid or the Mongoloid. This is consistent with the insurmountable evidence prior to 1970 that we're a separate species. That case was already proven before 1970. You don't build entire fields of science off of two shreds of evidence. It just doesn't happen. But that's what we see has happened with the definition of human, in the same way that the definition of male and female has become legislated without scientific support. In fact, against the scientific evidence. And so here's another one of my, here's some more of my DNA. This one's from Ancestry.com. And you can see that, again, I share absolutely no DNA with the Negroid or Mongoloid, again, confirming the previous ideas that the Negroids and Mongoloids are a completely separate species. And then here, this is 23andMe DNA. And so you can see, again, no DNA is shared with the Negroid or Mongoloid. So that proves that actually, this case was closed before 1970, that we were a separate species. There was already enough evidence to indicate that we're a separate species. And instead of, relying on science, the legislature really overwrote science. And now we have scientists who are, their positions at universities are threatened. These incredible scientists have their careers ruined over this definition of human.
Humans have 46 chromosomes and chimpanzees have 48 chromosomes. 46 divided by 48 equals 95. So that story that we share 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees is factually untrue, because when you divide our total number of chromosomes, not the DNA on those chromosomes even, but just the total chromosome number, you get 95, not 98. That means it is impossible for us to be 98% similar or to share 98% of our DNA. That is an outright lie. We are being lied to, and we are getting to the bottom of this lie today. So we can see here that a considerable range of hybrid fowl have been born in captivity despite significant chromosomal differences between the parent species. Now, that whole story that mules are infertile is also untrue. Let's look at this article that was published in 1985. But the reality is that this has been well known for over 300 years. There has been no doubt that the animals are occasionally fertile. And let's look at the chromosomal differences between equine and donkey. So the zebra has 44 chromosomes and the donkey has 64 chromosomes. The rabbit can breed with the lepus. Rabbits have 44 chromosomes and lepus have 48 chromosomes. Turkey and pigeons and sugarcane all share 80 chromosomes. So pretty much all felines actually have the same chromosome number despite being distinct and separate species. These are things like jaguar, lions, tigers, cougars. The polar bear and grizzly bear are different species with the same chromosome number. So we should not be classified as the same species based on a chromosome number and having the same, being bipedal. We do not do that with any other species. So we can see in this article, natural hybridization between primates. So science has well established that Negroids and Mongoloids did evolve from apes. They are actually a variety of hybrid ape, which could very well result in bipedalism. It is an argument about how bipedal a species is. So because the quadruped chimpanzees, gorillas, and bonobos usually walk on all fours, they're not considered human. Well, we're going to get into that today because there are varieties of Negroids and Mongoloid populations who still walk on all fours. And this gets into the debate over what exactly is human. So natural hybridization in primates, this shows that instead of a branching of separate species such as Negroid, Mongoloid, chimpanzee, gorilla, bonobo, gibbon, there is in fact actually an ongoing pattern of interbreeding between these species, which create a reticulate pattern or web-like pattern where the species branch off into individual groups, such as Negroids and Mongoloids, and other groups continue this hybridization state between those orangutans, chimpanzees, gibbons, these sorts of things that is actually still going on today. So here we can see pan ancestors are basically like Australopithecus afarensis, that sort of thing. We can see these are pan ancestors here, and pretty much all of these below Homo sapien are considered non-human species. These are what Negroids and Mongoloids evolved from, these non-human species. So they were still in zoos in 1950s, 20 years later, just 20 years later, we come up with this now disproven theory of complete replacement out of Africa, which is, there has never been evidence to substantiate that. The only thing was mitochondrial DNA, which was presented in 1985 and has also been disproven. And these are two shreds of evidence that we have based entire education systems on. Two shreds of evidence. Here we can see gorilla DNA, chimpanzee DNA, and varieties of races. We can see that the so-called Native American shares DNA with chimpanzees and gorillas. So do Africans. Well, what does that say about the Native American? It says that the Native American is native to Africa because they have chimpanzee and gorilla DNA, which is found in Africa, not America, not Canada, not South America. These Native Americans were likely brought over here on galleys because of their resistance to vitamin D and vitamin C deficiencies, which would kill Caucasians who were not exposed to sunlight and did not have access to fruits. And the reason for that is they have entirely different biological needs for food, nutrients, and various things. And it is extremely important for the survival of all races that we separate because there are biological consequences for species who did not evolve together to live together. So here we can see this alleged hybrid, Augusto Gambo. His mother said that he was the result of a chimpanzee-human love affair. Now, these are not uncommon. Sexual relations between humans and chimpanzees are common in this region. So I want you to look at his phenotypes, is what you call the shape, size, and structure of things like his nose. So we can see there's a lack of a nose bridge here. The part of his nose right in between his nostrils goes straight up. And we see that his nostrils are almost about flush with the tip of his nose. So these features, a short, relatively flat face, are seen in hypertrichosis, Down syndrome. These are mosaic genetic disorders. And we know that hybridization between species results in mosaicism. Here's another hybrid. This is a hybrid between a dog that has 78 chromosomes and a fox that has 76 chromosomes. And it had an even number of chromosomes right in between. It had 76 chromosomes, which is right in between 74 and 78, which is what you would expect. And it was also presumed to be fertile. And when scientists went to go check on this dog, they were told that it died. And here we're going to look at a hybrid of two completely different kingdoms. The kingdom Animalia, animal, and the kingdom Planta, plants. So you can see that this green sea slug encodes the DNA of plant into its genome. Now, there are varieties of species that are known to be hybrids between extremely distant species, such as the platypus, having features of mammals and snakes. It has venom and fur and webbed feet like a bill of a duck. So quite a variety of species, and these have been proven to be hybrid species. You can look at the DNA and determine that it's a hybrid species, which is what we've done with humans. I just showed you back in those articles. But we're going to be looking at some of these so-called missing links, which are actually hybrids, because there is no missing link. The problem with Darwin's theory of gradualism is a false premise that every species is striving to be an anthropomorphic human. There is nothing that indicates that all species is evolving to be more intelligent or more like us. In fact, most of the evidence indicates a devolution or de-evolution of intelligence. So it is a very fragile thing that must be protected or it will be lost.
And presented its findings. One scientist did a test looking at Oliver's center of gravity, which apparently concluded that he was more human than chimp. But such tests could not answer the fundamental question: was he a human-chimpanzee hybrid? To do that, he had to be sedated, his blood taken, and his chromosomes counted. At last, Michael Miller was going to find out if Oliver really was a humanzee. Or so he thought.
My remembrance is that there were 47 chromosomes that they found, and that the humans have 46, and the ape has 48. And that would put him right in the middle.
The TV show implied that the results were far from conclusive. Of the 40 cells analysed, 38 came back saying Oliver was a chimp. But 2 cells showed 47 chromosomes, one more than a human and one less than a chimp. In effect, a hybrid. Japanese doctors attributed the discrepancy to human error. However, far from resolving the mystery, the TV show had simply helped hype it to fever pitch. But there was worse to come.
They could just be the missing link between man and ape. For the past year, their existence has been known to just a handful of experts who have been sworn to secrecy.
Modern human beings could return to an animal state. A genetic problem which has undone the last 3 million years of evolution, returned them to a primitive stage.
Rajit Ullas and his wife have an astounding 18 children. 12 were born healthy, but 6 had a unique disability.
So far as we knew, no other case like the one in front of our eyes had ever been described before. There were no reports in the scientific literature of adult human beings walking on all fours.
And could have passed a faulty gene onto some, but not all of their children. Basic neurological tests confirm there is something wrong with their brains, but that still doesn't explain why they walk like animals.
That in the middle of the cerebellum here, what's called the vermis, it's shrunk.
A young man presented without any cerebellum, but he could still walk.
It doesn't in itself account for their walking on 4 legs. Everything we know about evolution suggests that no single gene will have been responsible. So therefore, damage to a single gene can't throw you back from being bipedal to being quadrupedal. There have to have been other things at work.
Hussein's movements are identical to an ape or monkey, ideally suited for balancing on branches.
Tragic human story.
This is a family in Africa that are quadrupeds, and they are siblings. Their parents only had 2 children, and these are them. They end up going to the woods to forage. It's not as rare as we might believe. It is probably much less likely for us to find out simply because these people don't live in areas where there's high amounts of technology or anything that would allow other people to become aware of them. Here's a young man named Zanziman in Africa. He primarily eats fruits and vegetables, mostly bananas, so he's making away with a lot of bananas here, and he will only eat in the woods where he's comfortable away from other people. So he feels safer in the woods. And actually, these people quite likely have parts of their cecum that humans do not have. These individuals are likely able to process cellulose. They have a completely different diet. They have different dietary needs. And all of those things are actually quite important. So these are profound, they have profound medical implications. It would also be problematic for human fertility. They theorize that he's actually 80 years old. I'm not sure how accurate that is. I know that Joseph found him in 1998. So he's had him for about 20 years, but they don't really know how old he was when they found him. They say he was about 50. It could actually be that, who knows how old he is, but he's on a bunch of medication because of his medical problems, which you would actually expect from a hybrid. And this is a short clip of a young man in Africa as well. He says that his features became prevalent when he was probably about 3 years old, it could be a form of mosaicism.
Modern human beings could return to an animal state. A genetic problem which has undone the last 3 million years of evolution, returned them to a primitive stage. Everything we know about evolution suggests that no single gene will have been responsible. So therefore, damage to a single gene can't throw you back from being bipedal to being quadrupedal. There have to have been other things at work.
An individual who has 2 or more genetically different cell lines derived from a single zygote. You can see some of the morphologies that were quite consistent with apes. Now, there are other genetic mosaic disorders that also have similar features to chimpanzees or gorilla. Many different species of animals have the same chromosome number, who are unrelated. Now, let's look at the felines, for example. These species can interbreed, and yet there are genetic problems that result when hybrids do occur. These species of feline include cougar, jaguar, leopard, tiger, lion, etc. When you breed these separate species, mosaicism and Down syndrome and a plethora of medical problems results, just like what we see in hybrid human races. Polar bears and grizzly bears can breed and are separate species with the same chromosome number. Turkeys and pigeons can also breed and are separate species. Darwin clearly stated in his book, Descent of Man, the ability to breed alone does not define a species.
Guys, awan guys. Layo ni na to guys.